Good morning, Michigan. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, good. All right. So my name is Jack Barlow. I'm a professor of politics at Juniata College here in Pennsylvania. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves and then ask you to introduce yourselves and your teacher, and we will get started. So without further ado, Judge Draper.
Good morning. My name is Lindsay Draper. I'm retired from the juvenile court bench here in Milwaukee County, Wisconsin.
And good morning. My name is Robert Allison. I am a professor of history at Suffolk University in Boston.
And would you tell us what school you're from, introduce yourselves, and introduce your teacher, please?
Good morning, my name is Avalon Mazurek and I'm a senior at East Kentwood High School.
Hi, my name is Story Triplett and I'm also a senior at East Kentwood.
My name is Naomi Fenema and I'm also a senior at East Kentwood High School.
And I'm Eric Dubois. I'm also a senior at East Kentwood High School and our coach is Justin Robbins.
Okay, great. As you probably know, there's some audio issues, so you're a little bit fuzzy. So if you please could make sure that you're speaking clearly, that would be helpful for us because we're old, you know, and can't hear as well as we used to be able to. Yeah, so, all right. So without further, did you say something? Okay. All right. So without further ado, we are going to start on the Unit 2 question for this morning. This is Unit 2, right?
Yes.
Okay. Unit 2 question, how did the framers create the Constitution? And it is question 2. It will come as no surprise to you, I'm sure. And it goes like this. One founder claimed that representatives should, quote, refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. End quote. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders? What alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? Please begin.
We agree with the principle of James Madison's assertion, but issues have arisen in the execution of refinement and enlargement. While refinement works in theory, it is reliant on virtuous representatives, which are hard to come by in modern times. The same can be said with enlargement, where expanding the field of public opinion should foster competition among factions. However, our political system has devolved into a two-party system, defeating the purpose of enlargement.
Found in Federalist 10, these ideas stem from Madison's knowledge of classical government systems. For example, the direct democracy of Athens demonstrated in its failures the need for refinement to filter the passions of the public and for enlargement to draw in competition of interests.
Madison's view of a large republic contradicts Montesquieu and Plato, who argue that large republics lead to tyranny of the majority. Instead, Madison draws on Scottish philosophers David Hume and Adam Smith that a stable republic can counteract the effects of factions over a large territory with competition in the commerce of ideas.
Madison was also aware of the dangers of relying on civic virtue in a republic, instead believing that multiple layers of refinement would draw on the most virtue possible. He believed an aristocratic Senate would be the most virtuous element of the national government. However, other proposed representative systems at the convention approached the need for refinement and enlargement differently.
The primary driver of the discussion was the Virginia Plan. It featured a bicameral legislature with one house elected by the people and a more refined house chosen by the first out of a pool of candidates nominated by the state legislatures. Additional refinement was proposed with the national legislature electing the executive and creating lower courts.
However, William Patterson's New Jersey plan refined the legislature and executive more. In it, each state selected representatives for Congress who would select a plural executive to further refine executive decisions. Legislative decisions were also refined by requiring state consent to pass laws and having the national judiciary chosen by the plural executive.
Alexander Hamilton's lesser-known proposal took refinement to the extreme. In it, the president was essentially chosen by electors, chosen by electors, chosen by the people. It also established strong national supremacy, effectively dissolving state governments and using large election districts to select presidents.
The delegates at the convention settled on a modified Virginia plan, with a proportional, popularly elected House of Representatives and senators elected by state legislatures with equal representation for each state. However, modern concerns have arisen based on how effectively citizens are represented in the structure and voting systems of the national government.
The most viable alternative to our democratic republic is found in Germany's national government structure, which has two legislative houses, the lower of which is split into two classes. One class consists of directly elected representatives, similar to the United States House of Representatives. The other is made up of representatives elected through a system of proportional representation.
Recent societal decline in political efficacy calls for this restructuring of Congress and the House of Representatives, as well as reform in the presidential primary and election system to increase the competitiveness of elections and ensure citizens' voices are heard. Implementation of jungle primaries on a national scale, smaller congressional districts, and requiring every state to divide electoral votes by congressional districts will bring the president closer to the people and encourage a multi-party system.
The increased democratization of the House would make necessary the repeal of the 17th Amendment, returning the Senate to its original purpose of representing the states as described in Federalist 62 and 63. We also favor an amendment requiring elected congressional officials to take a 3-year gap from service between terms to encourage more rotation in office, as explained by Brutus in Anti-Federalist 62.
We appreciate your time and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. I had not thought about this question before, but your opening statement made me wonder about this. And that is, Madison has earlier in Federalist 10 rejected the idea of some sort of civic education for American citizens. So I'm wondering, do you think that some sort of more systematic civic education for citizens would be helpful in making our representative system more representative or better representative?
As we can see in today's society, in America at least, our lack of civic education is very prevalent. In Michigan, our AP government test scores were just on average a 3, and that's barely passing. And across the United States as a whole, only 6 states got to an average of 3.
So in light of that, clearly civic education is lacking, and we can see these effects in our current society where people can't even discern between fact and opinion. There was a Pew Research study that showed that only 26% of adults could distinguish between they were given 5 facts and 5 opinions, only 26% could discern all facts, and only 35% could discern all opinions. So clearly people are not educated well enough to discern between these things.
And because of that lack of discernment, you also see the increase of polarization where people can't communicate their ideas effectively without just stating their opinions. And therefore we lose the art of civil discussion.
I think with the idea of solving this, though, the water becomes murky. If you were to implement something nationally, it steps on states' rights. Due to the 10th Amendment, these states get to decide what classes should these students be taking. So it becomes a federal versus state tension that we wouldn't have had before.
So I want to be sure that I understood your recommendation that there be a 3-year gap between terms. Are you suggesting that the gap be, for instance, if you're in Congress for 2 years, that you have to wait for 3 years? Did you say that you have to wait 3 years for senators? Who are you talking about?
So the prerequisite that we've considered is having each representative serve for a minimum of 20 years before they actually have to begin their 3-year gap to encourage more rotation in office. And we don't have to worry about, oh, this is a brand new senator, and now they have to take your 3-year gap. What did they actually learn for their job?
One of the benefits of especially that long-term Southern senators many years ago had was that they became committee chairmen, and they got the chance to direct funds to, in many instances, what would otherwise have been impoverished areas of the country. Lots of bases, military bases showed up in their areas. isn't that a great loss to a state if seniority gets lost under your suggestion?
I think the use of that 20-year grace period before rotation kicks in mitigates that issue, especially if we implement it now, because multiple representatives will start their 20-year grace period at different times. So the rotation in office won't be floods of new representatives every so many years. So we still maintain that experience in office, just with different representatives.
I think it's also helpful to note that it's not necessarily a bad thing to have a different committee chairman. It helps bring in new ideas, new views, and really a new point of view at the issues they're looking at, and could potentially help look at it from a wide angle rather than just focusing on one thing for the people.
Okay, thank you.
I'm wondering if a multi-party system would be a good thing, or would it lead to more polarization among small, fragmented parties? Would people be less able to talk to each other than they are now with a two-party system?
So the original idea that we had with implementing a multi-party system was to encourage parties like the Green and Libertarian Party to arise and mitigate a two-party system that we have in place right now, because it is so heavily polarized. And decreasing the size of congressional districts also helps representatives to serve less people and hope that their views get represented accurately. Like, I'm a member of the Green Party, but I feel as though I should vote Democrat in the presidential primary and presidential election, because I feel like my voice isn't heard when I'm voting for my party. But hopefully in our system that is mitigated.
Right, as Story is saying, that rational choice theory is kind of eliminated in that process. But we also see this multi-party system working in other areas. We see it working in Germany and the UK, where these coalitions can form and work together, and we don't see that hyperpolarization that could be.
However, there are examples of it working poorly. We have the example of Israel, where in recent years, their multiple parties, I believe it's 14 different parties, they had to elect a leader for their state, but no one could decide on anything. And it led to them deciding on a leader that no one really wanted, but they knew that they needed somebody, and somebody fast, before things began to fall apart.
Again, you see this issue with Italy's government, where there's so many coalitions that the hyperpolarization causes no real policy making or any government action to be done, because they can't agree on a decision. And essentially they start dissolving their own government over and over and over again, proving them quite useless because of hyperpolarization.
Would you advocate increasing the size of the House of Representatives?
Yeah, so the idea that we would be implementing with our system is shrinking the congressional districts. Each representative is representing less people, but in turn, there would be more people represented. And we've gone back and forth with how many people each representative would be representing. We've considered anywhere from the current 700,000 to the UK's 70,000. And yeah, we've gone back and forth depending on how many representatives that would create in our large society.
In addition to that, we want to implement a system similar to Germany's lower house, Bundestag, where there's a separate class of proportionally elected representatives to more accurately reflect the different views of a state, and this would also increase the size of Congress and make decisions more accurate towards the people's views.
Briefly, and I apologize, Judge Barlow, briefly, wouldn't making sure that we clean up the whole gerrymandering issue solve a great deal of this by having dadgummit?
Bro was gonna get asked this question anyway. Yeah. Judges feedback.
You want to go ahead?
Sure. Well, the smaller district sizes that we like to implement would limit the effects of gerrymandering, simply because a smaller district makes those weird shapes harder, and having more districts around it would also either disallow gerrymandering in general, and also would balance each other out. If you see gerrymandering one district towards one side and more districts around it that can gerrymander the other, you can see something.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. This was an interesting discussion this morning. This is a great way to start the morning off, at least for me. I like that you talked about civic virtue in your opening statement. You brought in, Montesquieu and Plato and Aristotle and Hume and all those guys that I teach. So, I mean, it was good. It was a nice refresher. It was a nice overview of the question. I thought you took the question apart very well. You didn't mention that it's actually slightly a misquotation of Madison, because he doesn't say they should do that. He says they might, which is a bit of a different emphasis, it seems to me. I liked that you finally brought in the reductio ad Italia at the end, right? Of well, Italy's government is a mess because they've got a lot of parties, and I'd been waiting for that. So that was good. I mean, I think you covered it very well, and I appreciate the discussion. You guys are clearly thoughtful folks. It's too bad. I don't think any of you is coming to Juniata College, are you? No? Well, it's not too late. I wish you were. So thank you. I'll turn it over to Judge Baker.
Thank you.
So a couple of things. I really do have to tell you that obviously I pay attention to the news as well, and was looking forward to talking to and hearing from the Michigan team. Can you mute your line? There we go. That I was looking forward to hearing, because you all have watched play out in very dramatic fashion what happens in our country with the polarization of ideas. And so I was really looking forward to hearing from you. I normally try not to repeat what anybody else the other judges have talked about, but I had little notes here as you were talking. And first I wrote Israel, and second I wrote Italy. And and so again, you made me happy when you talked about them, because let's be honest, Israel is in crisis right now, trying to find a leader. And the fact that you were able to identify it said that we didn't just prepare this, we're paying attention to what's happening in the world. I have several, I need to be quiet so my cohort can talk. I enjoyed listening to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I also very much enjoyed listening to you. Your introductory statement was great, and you brought in David Hume, Adam Smith, Brutus, other folks that really need to be thought about in the way you explained the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan in the context of representation, Hamilton's plan. I mean, that was really very well done. And then in your answers, you were really able to think about that, bring us things like the civic education in Michigan, and the Israel and Italy, and refining your ideas, explaining your ideas on the term limits and term gaps and so on. I'm not sure I agree with any of this, but I really appreciate the fact that you're thinking about these things. And just as Madison, Brutus, et cetera, were thinking about solutions to their problems. So it was really inspiring to listen to you this morning as you're going through these different, the history, current events, and really thinking about them in a very sophisticated way. So it's really admirable. It'd be admirable at any time to have a group of students like you who are really thinking so seriously about questions like this. But at a time like this, when we've had a health crisis and political polarization, to see you really thinking about this. It inspires me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, guys.